All right, everybody. Good evening. Some people will be coming in, so I'm just sort of killing a little bit of time, speaking slowly as they do. But most importantly, it's a little bit after 5 p.m. Pacific time where I am on the West Coast. And that can only mean one thing. It is time once again for another episode of The Yard. The Yard is a production of Commissary Club. Commissary Club is the first social network for 70 million Americans who have a criminal record. My name is Richard Bronson. I am the founder and CEO of Commissary Club, along with 70 Million Jobs, which is the national employment platform for folks with records. Normally, as folks who join us Thursday nights know, I'd be normally joined by my friends and teammates and co-hosts Seth Sundberg and Divine. But we are all of the opinion that when the three of us are co-hosting, naturally there's a tendency for there to be a bit of testosterone flying around. And we kind of think that might be a little bit inappropriate when we've got particularly a woman, a guest who happens to be a woman. Last week, for example, we had the amazing Sabrina Butler-White joining us, and she and I chatted. So I will be doing the solo tonight. So if you got any problems or you're not happy, blame it on me. I am joined, of course, ably, as we always are, by another one of my teammates and friends, Adrian Hatter, who sort of runs things behind the scenes. So we, all of us would obviously love to thank you so much for once again joining us on The Yard. Before we get started, I just want to share a couple of housekeeping items, and then I'll introduce our amazing guest. On The Yard, like Commissary Club, the goal is ultimately to connect people who have records with one another, connect people who don't have records with one another, and every other permutation that we can find. We believe that if people without records get to know people who do have them, they will inevitably recognize that there's not much of a difference between them and themselves. That ultimately we are all joined by our humanity, and there's much more that connects us than keeps us apart. We also are eager, in as safe and tolerable fashion, to have people who've never done time, people who've never been in a prison or jail, to sort of give you an insight of what it's like in a very small dose to be incarcerated. I can promise you that if you were incarcerated, your attitudes about incarceration and criminal justice in general would change. And if more and more people had that experience, I dare say that things would improve dramatically. So our goal, what we try to reenact, we're not big on the well, I guess we are a little bit big on the theatrics. But what we try to do is we try to simulate that we're bringing you out into the yard at a prison. And the yard, any prison has a yard. They're all basically the same in that they're big, flat, dusty places where they let out the folks who are incarcerated on a daily basis, unless people are in solitary, in which case they never get out there. But once they're out there, folks have the opportunity to connect with one another, to share thoughts, to yell at each other, to laugh, to argue, you know, the way people do when they get together, and sometimes share bad news and maybe come close to crying. Crying, however, is distinctly a dangerous thing to do when you're in prison, and certainly on the yard, because crying obviously shows weakness, and weakness in prison is something that you want to avoid at all costs. Now, we would like everybody to please feel free to utilize the chat feature on the bottom of your screen and pose questions and share comments and insights and experiences and say hello to one another and whatever the hell else you want to do there. It's for you. However, as it relates to questions particularly, I'm going to ask you to please confine your thoughts and questions and insights to the actual in-prison experience. If we consider a person's interactions in the criminal justice system, you know, as an arc, you could look at it, well, what happened before you went to prison, what happened when you were in prison, and what happened afterwards. And they're all important, and they're all worthy of our attention and discussion. But for the sake of our little slice of the experience, we focus on what's it like in prison. So if you have a question or a comment, you know, please try to focus it on that. As I always say, from time to time, we bring people in from the audience who are interested in posing questions or participating in the discussion. And nothing has changed today at all. If you're watching here and you would like to be part of the dialogue, I urge you to please contact Adrienne through the messaging. Find her name on the drop-down list and send her a message. She'll probably ask you, you know, what's on your mind, and then we'll try to get you into the discussion. If you much prefer just sitting back and watching, that's also terrific as well. So, having said all that, let's get going here. I'm going to ask you to do something that we have done. I don't know if this is our 19th or 20th episode of The Yard, but we do it every time. We do this sort of to get everybody into the mood. And I'm going to ask everybody right now, first, just to take a deep breath, you know, just to breathe in slowly and slowly let it out. It's been a long day. It's towards the end of the week. You deserve a deep breath and relax a little bit. Now, having done that, I'm going to ask you next to please close your eyes. I want you to close your eyes, and if you can, sort of just let your mind wander, you know, for a moment. I'm not going to hypnotize you, so don't worry. But I'd like you to have sort of an expansive mind that allows you to have your imagination, you know, kind of run wild a little bit. You know, people in prison, facing prison, they're dealing with problems, and legal, including legal problems. They come into one's life. But that's a problem. Sometimes problems come into our lives very, very quickly. I imagine them almost like a tsunami, and they're devastating, and they leave, you know, destruction in their wake. Other times, problems take longer to unfold, and it's almost surreal how you can watch them unfold as they are slowly derailing your carefully planned life. I'll give you an example of something like that. We all know right now, as we're coming out of the pandemic, the economy is heating up. Meanwhile, people have been leaving their homes in big cities, and they've been buying homes elsewhere. Now they can work from home. Now they're thinking much more in terms of quality and life of life. Life is too short. So the real estate market is red hot. Okay, that much we know. And maybe, that's what you've been thinking of. And maybe you and your significant other have had a conversation and you said, something, why don't we find another place? Let's get a big place, a nice piece of land out in the country where, as a family, we can reconnect, where it's quiet, where it's safe. And, you will improve the quality of your life. Now, inevitably, when you start looking for a home, you're going to have an idea of what you can afford. But unfortunately, when you're looking at homes, you can't help but look at places that maybe are a little bit out of your price range. But in this particular case, you're thinking, something, this may be out of our league, but, real estate always goes up in value. And let's push ourselves and let's get a place maybe that's a little bit beyond our means, but we'll figure out a way to swing it. So you found the right place and it's beautiful, and you contact your bank and you start working on the mortgage papers. You don't have all the cash that you need for the down payment. So you went to friends, you went to family, you were able to borrow a few $100,000 from a friend. Now, you're not really supposed to do that. You're not supposed to be borrowing, because part of your credit worthiness is your ability, how much can you borrow? And if you're borrowing more money, that's something that's supposed to be disclosed, but you do it anyway. Everybody does that. And you also, on, your mortgage papers, you listed as collateral a second home that you used to own many, many years ago. You don't own it now. But you figured you owned it a long time ago. Nobody is ever going to bother confirming that your ownership for the home, and it'll help you get the mortgage for your house. So that's what you write on the mortgage papers. And yeah, and you were right, because you do get your mortgage. And you've moved into your new home, and it's everything you were dreaming of and more. And your family life has never been better, and you're sleeping better, and you're eating better, and you're in great shape, and your family has never, ever been closer. And life is really, really good. That's what you're feeling, except for one thing. As part of its annual review of your account, the IRS has noticed that you just bought a very expensive new home that they're thinking maybe is a bit too expensive for the money that you're earning. They know what you're earning, and they're saying, there's no way these people bought this home. So they start digging, as the IRS does. And the IRS discovered that, in fact, you had doctored the mortgage papers. And not only that, they discovered other things, because inevitably they will. They discovered that you also were routinely, and I mean routinely, I mean for years, you were writing off personal expenses like dinners with friends, and you were calling them business expenses. I mean, everybody does it, but now the IRS is looking and they found it. And guess what? Now you've got trouble. Now you got big trouble. And virtually overnight, it seems, the FBI has been to your home with a warrant. They've searched your home. They've frozen your bank accounts. They've started talking to your business associates and friends. Your neighbors are whispering, you know that. And your wife or your husband is freaking out. All right, now let's fast forward a couple of years from now. And you've just woken up from your sleep. And as your eyes awaken, you look around as you gain awareness from waking up, and you realize that you're lying in a cot. And when you look forward, you see that there are bars on the door. And when you look to the left, you notice that there's a stainless steel toilet about 6 inches from your head that you've been sleeping next to, a toilet that's attached to your sink. And on the other side of you, maybe a foot away, there's somebody else in this space you're in, and that someone else is also waking up, and that someone else is waking up, and that person is coughing and wheezing for air. And it goes through your mind with dread and horror that you've been breathing the same exact air as that someone else. And that someone else, it turns out, has contracted the coronavirus. Yeah, you're in prison. You're in prison for tax fraud. You're not a bad person, but that's where you are. And you're going to be there for another 3 years. And prison sucks. Prison is terrible. The food is terrible. The lack of privacy is terrible. The guards are terrible. They treat you like you're not a human being. Welcome to prison. But once a day, they let you out onto the yard. Once a day, you can get some fresh air. And if the sun is shining, you can enjoy a warm sun. And if you're of a mind, you can toss around the football. Or if you're of a mind, you could work out a little bit. But what you do normally is you find your friends on the yard and you get together with them like friends do, anywhere, anytime. And for you, these are very, very special moments, because for you, if only for these few minutes, you're no longer a number, you're no longer an animal. For these few minutes, for once again, you're a human being like you were before your life spiraled completely out of control. So I'm going to take you out onto the yard, and I want you to meet somebody that I know who is incredible, that you should meet. Her name is Ivy Woolf-Turk, excuse me. Ivy, it is a pleasure to have you here on the yard. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome. Ivy, you've muted yourself. You're mute, Ivy. Adrian? One moment. We got to get Ivy fixed up. Now we go.
Great. Hi.
Hi. You were worried about your dog barking.
Right.
And I guess you had reason to worry.
She was, but she's sleeping now.
Okay, good. Well, welcome. We're thrilled to have you here. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Let me just take a minute to talk a little bit about who you are. About 12 years ago, Ivy was a very, very successful businesswoman in New York City. She and a partner had built a real estate business into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. Their business was buying and selling homes and dealing in mortgages and generating huge returns for themselves and their investors. And I can tell you, as an ex-New Yorker, New York is a great place to live in if you're making millions of dollars. And Ivy, who is a very educated woman from a good family, she was taking full advantage of her success. But then, like the story I just made up before, things went south quickly. Unbeknownst to her, her partner was doctoring the paperwork. He was playing fast and loose with investors. And suddenly Ivy and her partner were charged with running a $27 million Ponzi scheme. And Ivy's life would never, ever be the same again. Like almost everyone that faces federal charges, Ivy pled guilty so as to avoid a much, much, much longer sentence. Ultimately, she received a 5-year sentence in federal prison. Her story is so amazing, is what happened when she got to prison and what she did with that time and what she's done since. So number one, Ivy, did I get your story basically right?
You did.
Okay, so it's fair to say, I think, and Ivy, you and I have spoken before and we connected, and to a certain extent, I feel like, you know, a lot of what you went through, I too went through. I was making a lot of money and leading a glamorous life, and then it all went to hell. You saw your life go from the highest highs in New York to arguably the lowest lows. So let me ask you, just to get started here. You were going to prison, that much you knew. Could you even believe what was going on in your life?
No. I mean, I had 2 years between the time the 21 FBI agents showed up at gunpoint and hauled me off in front of my children. And before that, chained me to my toilet. But in those 2 years, I really believed that I was not going to go to prison. Prison was not, it wasn't something that was commonplace. Like I had friends who went to prison, like there was a denial around it, that this wasn't going to happen, that I was going to prove to them that, they shouldn't send me to prison. And on the day of my sentencing, it was shocking. It was shocking. And, everything that led up to that, them taking my home, in that first day, I mean, in July of 2007, it was 15 minutes and my home, my reputation, every dollar I had ever earned, gone, thrown off boards, excommunicated from communities I had devoted my life to. And no, it was hard, it was hard to believe. But I will say that you find out who your real friends are, and you find out who in your family cares about you.
We're going to talk about that in a minute. That's one of my questions to ask you about. But let's sort of reenact the situation. I remember I was sentenced, and frequently, and maybe you give the same advice, people ask me, I have a friend who's being sentenced, what advice would you give him or her? And I say, the minute you can go to prison, go to prison. Don't put it off, because the 2 years for you and the year and a half for me that I was waiting to go when I knew full well I was going were the worst for me, the worst year and a half of the whole experience.
Yeah, I agree with you. It requires a certain amount of, it's like you're living, it's almost like you've got menthol running through your veins instead of blood, you,
Yep.
you just know that you're facing something, and you can't fathom it. And there's shame, and there's guilt, and there's fear, and there's so many moving parts. And Big Brother is watching you, and everything is it's horrible. So yes, that advice is for sure, if you can make it happen quickly. Although, right now in this past year, that wasn't necessarily the advice I was
Yeah.
giving people.
Assuming there's not a pandemic
Right.
that's tearing through the prison system. But the point is that you don't get credit for that time while you're waiting. It's not reducing your sentence, and you're in prison essentially for all intents and purposes. You might as well get credit for it. So you get to prison. Now, let me ask you a question. Did you self-report to your prison?
I did.
I did too. Some people are found guilty, they go to trial, the judge pronounces them guilty, sentences them, and they're taken away immediately. And they're put in a holding cell, and then they're sent to a jail or a prison in short order. They don't go home. In my case, it was all it was almost like a ballet, how it was all planned out, and the logistics of it. And I was allowed to self-report. And I will tell you, I don't know about you, but that was the most surreal thing, in that I had my little satchel of, a few personal items, and I take an Uber, or a driver takes me to the front gate of the prison, and there's of course a gate, and I knock on this door, and someone answers the door. It's a guard. They go, "Yes, can I help you?" And I go, "Yeah, I'm here for prison." Like, and he goes, "Okay," and he goes, "Come this way." And I was very conscious that first step, I was crossing that line from freedom to prison, and it was of my own volition. Nobody was dragging me in there. You had that same thing. How surreal was that one step?
Well, that step was surreal, but what happened after that was even more surreal.
What happened?
I self-surrendered on a Friday, which is when they told me I had to come, and they told me I had to be there by 9:30 in the morning, and that I had to bring ID. And so you walk in and you hand them your ID, and they said, okay, say goodbye to the folks that brought you here, which of course is a surreal moment. You feel like you're going to the gulag, to the guillotine. You maybe never gonna come out of there. And they make them leave. They take your ID and they put me in a room. And the room at Danbury is part of the FCI, which is the low, which is a more stringent prison. I was going to the camp, which was across the field. But this is where the R&D intake was. So they asked me to wait in the waiting room. And now it's 10 o'clock, and now it's 11 o'clock, and now it's 12 o'clock. And through the wall, I'm watching people come and go and put their belongings in their locker, and their kids crying about seeing, daddy or mommy. And then a group of Yale law students comes in, and from the back wall, as the door is opening, and there are like 30 Yale law students walking in, talking about touring the prison, I'm like shriveling, like, what am I doing here? This is like, and so one of the guys says to me, oh, are you one of the professors from Cornell that's meeting us? And I couldn't even answer him. And then I hear behind me, the guard who had taken my ID is ordering Chinese food. And I'm in this, like, I'm afraid to move. I'm afraid to ask a question. It's now 2 p.m. and I've been sitting there and I'm shivering and I'm frightened and I don't know what's going to happen to me. And why am I sitting here? And finally, I got the courage to walk out of the waiting room, and he says, what are you doing, Woolf-Turk? You were told to wait. And I said, okay, I just thought maybe you forgot about me. He goes, we didn't forget about you. Okay, well, I sat there until 4:30, and finally he came and he handcuffed me and brought me through the metal detector and into what I would call a holding cell, similar to what happened when the FBI took me out of my home and brought me underneath the tombs of New York and threw me in this like cold marble cell with, like you see in the movies, like with a little window with like a trap door that opens. And now I was in another one, and I'm thinking, they must have made a mistake. They must think I'm like a murderer or something. Like, why am I in here? Anyway, I don't know how long I sat there, but they then take you in, they give you a tuberculosis test. They ask you if you know why you're there, to check your mental acuity. They read this whole thing, and say, do you realize that you'll be here for 60 months? And, that meanwhile, you're like shaking, you haven't had anything to eat or drink. And then a female guard comes and she says, right this way, and tells you to take off your clothes and strip naked in front of her. Now, I had no idea this was going to happen. And the next thing I know, I'm naked in front of this woman, and I'm having to bend over and cough and lift my breasts and flap open my ears and open my mouth. And she says, okay, now get dressed. And she hands me what felt and looked like a potato sack, like a men's like army top, like V-neck thing, with a pair of men's trousers and a pair of steel-toed boots. And she says, come with me. And then they continue to ask me questions, and they put me back in the holding cell. And now I'm seeing from this little window that it must be getting dark out, because it's getting dark in the holding cell. And the next thing I know, she throws an orange jumpsuit in the holding cell and says, your counselor has gone home for the weekend. You'll be spending your time in solitary. Spending my time in solitary? I said, no, sir, you've made a mistake. I'm here to go to the camp over the hill over there. And he said, you ain't going nowhere. There's nobody to receive you and give you your uniforms and your bedding. So you'll be with us until further notice.
It sounds like there's quite a event going outside your window.
There is. I'm so sorry about that. You know, it's good.
You're living in New York now, right?
Yeah, I live in Long Island City. I just moved out of New York City. So rarely, that's actually a fire truck. I don't know what's happening, but hopefully it'll fade.
Hopefully
It's
it's
getting
not
louder.
your. This is live TV, folks.
So, so here I am, and I'm in what you guys would think were, I don't know if any of you have ever gone to rescue a dog, to a dog shelter where you see cages next to each other and, they're lined up one on top of another. Well, this was 3 huge rows of human cages. And I was led into one with a bloody mattress, like a plastic thing that had like a upswing of a pillow. It was bloody. There was no sheet, no blanket, no nothing. A toilet attached to a sink on the side. And meanwhile, I hadn't eaten since 7 o'clock in the morning, and it's now like 9 o'clock at night, and I'm cold and I'm hungry and I'm tired and I'm scared and I don't understand what's happening. And that's how I spent the next 8 days. And all I can say is I was in there because they could. They thought, they saw in my thing that I was born Jewish, and the chaplain was also on vacation, and they somehow assumed that because I was Jewish, that I was kosher. And so they didn't feed me for 3 days, because in prison, if you want kosher food, you have to request it. And I kept saying, you don't understand. I'm a Reformed Jew. I'm not religious. I'm not kosher. As a matter of fact, I'm a practicing Buddhist. Like, I need something to eat. You've got to help me. And they said, sorry, ma'am, until the chaplain comes, we can't help you. And then on the 3rd night, as I literally was like shaking and wishing I were dead, not a book wouldn't give me a pencil or a pen to my children, I have 4 children.
No
they
phone
were waiting.
call, of course.
No phone call. They're wondering what happened to me. It was like I went through that door and I disappeared. Nothing. And a nice woman, the midnight guard shift, they do a count and the guard shifts. And this woman came in and she saw me crouching between the toilet and the bed. And she said, do we need to call medical? And I said, no, you just need to give me some food. And out of her pocket, she took an apple and she said, I'll be right back. And she brought this, what tasted like sweet tea. And she said, now drink this, dear, drink this. And she sat stroking my head until like the color came back in my cheeks and said, I'll be on every night. And if they won't feed you, I will bring you food. And it was, I wept. I could cry now when I think of her. She was this 350-pound African woman with a turban and this jolly face. And she just said, don't worry, God has you. I will pray for you. And, 8 days later, they let me out of there. And I would say that was a very auspicious beginning to the 60 months.
Did you, just to jump ahead, did you manage to stay in touch with this woman when you got out?
I have.
Hmm.
You're not supposed to, and I have. And I'll get into that later when I talk about what I do now, because I've been very fortunate to be able to actually have relationships with the people that showed real, the real meaning of there's more that binds us than what separates us. And throughout my experience, that happened over and over and over again. And, they let me out of there, out of the SHU, which is solitary housing unit. And I was like a deer in the headlights, and the first thing they do is they bring you to your counselor, and she sits there and does the same thing. It's not like, okay, we're going to help you and help rehabilitate you. It's, we're going to keep shaming you and reminding you that you're here to be punished. And so she goes, well, let's see, conspiracy to commit mail and wire fraud, no email. I said, ma'am, I'm in the middle of an appeal and you don't understand. I didn't have anything to do with an email. And I don't really, I always, meanwhile, I sounded like such a privileged brat when I look back, but I said, I always had a secretary. Like there's no reason not to give me email. My kids are expecting to hear from me. She goes, well, you'll just have to write them the old fashioned way. And maybe if they send you some money, dearie, you'll get to talk to them on the phone. And I'm thinking, what's going on here? Like, nobody explained this to me. I'm not a cyber criminal. Why can't I have email? Anyway.
So let me ask you specifically about that. You had, this wide range of
Sorry. Asia, come up here and say hello so everyone can meet you instead of you barking. Come on, I have a goodie for you.
Is about 3 ounces.
She's only 8 pounds.
So you had guards who were dismissive and, weren't available for you when you got there, and you met this woman who was like an angel. As a matter of fact, Angie called her an angel on earth, who, had to restore your faith in human beings, immediately like that. In general, were you treated like that privileged, I don't know how you described yourself, a privileged what? Is that?
I was definitely, the first thing that my counselor said to me was 27 million, eh? Well, you won't be dreaming about any of that here. It was like, they didn't see me as Ivy. I was no longer Ivy. I was 60216-054. They read something about me. My skin was white. I was, clearly highly educated. When you go in, there's something called a pre-sentence report. They know where your unborn children lie. They know everything about you. And she's reading this thing. She's flicking her nails and she's, telling me, oh yeah, you're going to have a hard time here. You better buckle down, girl. And I'm thinking, you don't know me. You have no idea. I'm like a good person. Like, so then I said, well, excuse me, ma'am. I've been in the SHU for 8 days and I know my children are worried. And she goes, oh, well, you won't have phone privileges until, tomorrow. The phones are turned off for the night. And I'm like, is it possible that I could get it just like a special phone call? My kids are probably freaking out. She said, I told you tomorrow. And then she handed me like a jelly roll with a horsehair blanket and some linens and said, you'll have to sleep in your clothes, too late to get you to uniforms. And that is when an army of angels appeared.
All right, now hold on for 1 sec before we get to the army of angels. This is a great story, Ivy, and a lot of people are sending me messages how much they're enjoying and also moved by the story. You're telling the story well. You're in prison, and after 8 days in the SHU, Did you really at that point still hold on to this feeling that I am a good person? At any point, were you thinking of yourself as, something, maybe I'm not such a good person, maybe I deserve some of this, maybe this is karma, 'cause I'm a Buddhist and I know about karma.
Well, I definitely felt it was karma, but I never thought um, I've always known who I am. And I've always been a heartfelt person. And yes, I made terrible decisions based on not believing in myself and trying to fix others, thinking that made me powerful. So, yes, in those 8 days and in the 2 years before, I had done a lot of work taking responsibility for my part in this. And quite frankly, I will take responsibility and learn about those parts of myself for the rest of my life, because I was not good enough, girl. And I thought that by looking like the epitome of success and having all these things that I could fix my partner, fix all these people, and that made me powerful. And the truth is, it's just the opposite. I had the power all along. I just didn't know it. And so, yes, in that time, I mean, it went deeper than that. I'm going to say something that may be shocking to all of you, but there was a part of me that wished I was dead. Like, that's how bad I felt. Like, I felt like I had ruined my children's lives. I had lost everything and I was worthless. But I still thought I was a good person. I just didn't want to be here. It was so painful and I was so ashamed that I had like been willfully blind. I had known for so many years that I needed to walk away. I had known there was shit going on and none of it really mattered to me, but I kept thinking I could fix it. And the truth is, I did, except the FBI found out 2 weeks too soon. It was like I just wanted to make it right. And I think that's the story of many people that I've met. And um, I regret it. I regret, taking that right turn instead of that left turn. If I had just gone to my investors and said, look, this is what I think is going on. We need to investigate it. And we're not closing the deal with the hedge fund. I'm out of here. That would have been the right thing to do. But I kept thinking I could fix it. It was willful blindness. It was in some ways narcissistic. It was, still believing I could keep the kids in college and have a home for them to
Your
come to.
ego was still running rampant here,
Right.
and you weren't yet ready to just give it all up,
No, I
which
was.
is which sometimes people experience in prison, after scrubbing 1,000 toilets.
It
There's a
didn't take
humility.
that. Yeah, I mean, it didn't take that for me. I really worked on that before I went.
All right,
And
well, let's get to that. But you're still, we're only in 8 days into your 5-year sentence. So they let you out of the shoe eventually,
right.
and you speak to your unit manager, whoever it is, and she lays down the law, and you realize, all right, this is not going to be this is going to be worse than perhaps I expected. You were, I imagine, put in some kind of housing unit, right? Like a big dormitory sort of
Yeah,
deal.
it's called the bus stop. And in it are 14 bunk beds and, fluorescent lights. And of course, they give me a top bunk. I was
By the bathroom,
no, it's
that's where
not.
they put me. They
Oh,
call that they call that a waterfront view.
uh-huh. Yeah, no, this is as far from the bathroom as you could get. And it's next to the rec room. So until 11 o'clock at night, there are fluorescent lights and people clicking dominoes and slamming cards and screaming and yelling and knitting and clicking knitting needles. And you're with 28 strangers and you can't believe it. It's like how did I land here?
What couldn't you believe? What hit you when you walked in?
I couldn't believe that I was wearing like a scratchy burlap potato sack and these steel-toed boots that were killing my feet and eventually broke my ankle. I couldn't believe, like the sparseness of this mattress that was literally like an inch thick, and I had to climb a ladder to get to it, and it was hard to like even make the bed, and you know, and then it was like 4:30 and they said it's dinner time, and this nice girl said, come on, I'll show you where the cafeteria is, and she took me, and it was like I was walking out, I was having an out of body experience. Everything is white and gray with burgundy trim, and it's one long hallway where you go down to a subterranean dorm area. There are rooms on one side, a medical office, and then the administration office on the right, the rec room behind you, and a cafeteria. And that was going to be my life for 5 years, that hallway. And as I was walking, and then I went in, and the din and the smell of like bacterial antiseptic mixed with like canned vegetables. I really, it was like, how did I land here? And I looked at the woman and I said, I'm really not hungry. Do I have to stay here? And she said, Ivy, sit down. You have to eat something. You have to eat something. And so this piece of chicken came out that looked like it had been injected with silicone. It was this huge, this like over, I never saw a chicken like this. It looked like a turkey leg, but it was a chicken. And it tasted like rubber and antiseptic, and there was some potatoes and canned vegetables, and I like took a bite, and people are asking me, so what'd you do? Why are you here? And it was like, look, my case is still going on. I'm appealing it. I don't really want to talk about it. I feel a little sick, and I really, is there anyone here who could show me how I could make a phone call? And like, I've got to speak to my children. Well, the phones are turned off during dinner, they go on, but then there's a long line. So if you want, we'll take you, and we can get online, and we'll teach you. You have to record your voice and put in your PAC number. And I said, well, what's a PAC number? They said, well, didn't your counselor give you a little card? And I said, no. She told me it was too late. I'd have to do it tomorrow. And so this one woman got indignant, and she said, that's fucking bullshit. I'm going to the CO. You got to get a PAC number. And and she was like, she took me by the arm and she said, come on, Wolf-Turk, you are going to call those kids. And she just, she was an angel. She rallied, and she got the CO to get me this number. And then we stood online, and I called my kids, and needless to say, you're standing like 2 steps up on an open balcony with 4 payphones that you put in this number and you record your voice. And it's a little difficult at first because they don't really recognize your voice. You have to keep redoing it, and finally you get it. And then you have to remember what your voice sounded like for the next 5 years to make a phone call. And I finally got my kids on the phone. And I remember it didn't matter that there were 100 women standing around me listening to my phone call. I just like needed to hear how my kids were and let them know I'm okay. And they already knew because they had called the prison. They had found out I was in the SHU and were told that I was doing fine. So I never told them then that they starved me, and about Gupta, the CO, and how bad things were. Like, I just wanted to hear how they were. And I cried and cried, and that woman stood with me, and she took me back to my bunk. And this is very emotional, because all I had was a little plastic men's comb, a little like half toothbrush, like the kind you get on an airplane, and a little mini thing of toothpaste and this potato sack to sleep in. And on my bed were sweatpants and a lock from my locker and shower shoes and granola bars and these little packets of instant coffee. And all these women were like peering, in the door of this 28 unit thing saying, Woolf-Turk, we left you stuff. We're collecting more. We're collecting more. And it was like, who are these people? Why are they doing this for me? And the women in the room were saying, you're a newbie. This is what we do for everybody. We're going to take care of you. Don't worry. Do you like Oreos? And I was like, I love Oreos. They have Oreos here.
All right, so were you a little suspicious that they were, because I'm sure you heard, don't accept something, don't be indebted, don't borrow. Were you suspicious? I was, because I had the same experience.
I was definitely a little suspicious. Like I kept saying, I don't have a lot of money. I don't know if I'm going to be able to pay you back. And it was like, you don't have to pay me back. You will pay it forward someday to somebody else. But in that moment, I couldn't really comprehend that. I was suspicious, but yet I was so grateful because there were Oreos and there was coffee and there was this schnuggly, holy, but schnuggly sweatshirt. And then this woman said to me, hi, my name is Renata and I'm your bunkie. And she was this beautiful Brazilian girl. And I just like hugged her and we started to cry. And the next thing I knew, she said, what size shoe do you wear? And I said, 7.5. She goes, I just saw a pair of size 9 on the garbage can. Go get them. I'm going to teach you how to stuff them with sanitary napkins. And at least you'll have sneakers because we're not going to be able to go to commissary until next week. And I was like, what do you mean? Who put them on the garbage can? Like, I can't take somebody's sneakers from the garbage can. She goes, Ivy, that's where people put things that they don't want. So somebody else will take it. So she walked me to the garbage can. There was this pair of like, ratty, old, huge size 9 sneakers. And that night she taught me how to line them with a sanitary napkin. So there was like a space for my toes and a thing in the back. So I didn't slip out of them. And I had a great pair of sneakers. And quite frankly, I kept them as long as I could because
I've been out of prison now about 20 years. I have my gym shorts from then, and they're still like the best gym shorts I ever had. The thing that's so amazing about this story, that the arc of human experience you encountered from the blithe indifference and almost cruelty of these guards when you first got there, to the compassion and to this woman guard who you're just one of a million other women coming in and out of there constantly. And yet some part of her heart went out towards you. And then you come into your unit where, I don't know about you, but I was scared shitless. I was ready to have a fight with the first person who looked at me the wrong way to sort of establish that. And you were met with a bunch of women who could not have been more understanding and compassionate and generous of spirit.
Loving.
That must have completely just sort of rocked your world, all of these different sort of human
experiences. Not only did it rock my world, but I have red hair, which is a little unusual. And there was no other redhead there. And I'm looking at these like baggy clothes, and I said, so like, are we allowed to alter our clothes? Like I started to get creative, like, but the real me was coming and I went, can we like tie this in a knot and like make this this like cute? And they're looking at me and going, Woolf-Turk, no, you're going to wear these baggy clothes. You're going to be so.
And it's not going to matter one bit.
It really isn't going to matter. And so then it was like, oh my God, how do I take, like, what, how do I take a shower? And there were shower shoes. Somebody gave me shower shoes, and they showed me, where you go, and somebody lent me a little thing of, in a milk carton from their thing of liquid soap, so I could like use it as shampoo. And, the towel, I mean, you have a towel that like is like a hand towel for your whole body. And then this girl came and she said, I inherited a bathrobe. They don't sell them anymore. Would you like it? And you'll
Wow.
send it to the laundry and you'll give it back to me, but
Wow.
you're going to be, and then there was this woman, I didn't know like the etiquette of where you get dressed and how you get dressed and what do you do. So I was kind of like by my bunk. By the way, Renata switched with me. She goes, I'm 30 years, you're younger. You're going to sleep on the bottom and I'm going to sleep on the top. So
No,
let's
that's great.
switch our mattresses. I said, all right, I'm not driving Miss Daisy here. I'm not that old. I'm only like 50 something. She goes, you just take the bottom bunk. So I'm trying to like put on my granny panties, okay, that they gave me, which, were like 4 sizes too big, and you don't get a bra. So they give you this like sport bra. And I'm sort of like trying to put everything on under my robe. And this 6-foot woman next to me goes, girl, I don't want to see that flat white ass of yours. Get out of here. And I turned around and I went, oh, I'm really sorry. She goes, I'm just kidding you. Come on, I'll hold your robe. And Shay, her name was Shay, she and I became friends. She became like my protector. She was this big, masculine, gay woman, and she just took a liking to me, and she would just make sure that,
No one messed with you.
nobody messed with me. But, interesting to what you said about not crying and not, the pathways that lead women to prison are very different than men. And the way that women are socialized both before and after prison is very different. So where you as a man, and many of the men I now work with, have to establish that you're not weak, that doesn't really exist in women. Women cry. When women are scared, I mean, not all, but many women think it's okay to cry. And for those first few days, somebody gave me a pad and pens and lent me stamps, and I got into the routine. And then another angel came and said, Woolf-Turk, there's an opening in the construction shed, and we heard you came out of real estate. You want it? You can be like the shop steward. You know how to drive? And I went, yeah. The only thing is, you got to decide, you want to mop a floor for an hour a day, you want to be gone all day long, a mile off campus. And I went, well, that sounds like a good thing. I could drive a truck. She goes, yeah, you'll do payroll, you'll drive the girls around, get supplies, you'll learn how to tile a bathroom, build a roof. And I went, okay. She goes, well, I thought you might say that. I'd like you to meet Mr. Raymond. And I'm standing there and I'm looking at this lovely man in his blue uniform. And he goes, hello, Woolf-Turk. Heard a lot about you. And I went, you have? Like, how could you have heard a lot about me? Who knows me here? He goes, everybody's been watching you. You'll make a good clerk. You start after you cleared through medical.
Wow.
I was like in the Twilight Zone. But like, these women were amazing. Like, they just set me up. They got me set up on email. They taught me like how to do the commissary list. They really got me going. And then, I worked in construction until one day there's nothing extracurricular in prison for women. The only thing that you can do is walk the track on a day where there's no fog or nobody's tried to escape. So for the most part, you can walk the track, or you can learn how to knit, crochet, or bead. I mean, there's no,
No
unless you,
musical instruments?
there's no musical instruments, there's no psychological classes. The only thing there is are volunteers that are usually of a religious nature that
Right.
come in each week. So I had a rabbi who came on Thursdays, who was unbelievable and taught, I was the only Jewish woman there. So she started teaching me how to read and write Hebrew, which I had never learned, and started teaching me Kabbalah because she felt like I was over 40 and this would be the time. And I'm a very spiritual person and there's interconnection with Buddhism. So I had this rabbi who would come and visit. Then on Fridays, the Buddhist priestess would come and we would do, we had a sangha of like 4 women and we would do meditation and she'd show us movies and read us all this Buddhist wisdom and turn us on to Pema Chodron and Thich Nhat Hanh and all, so I was learning. Then there was a Christian prayer group who came on Wednesday nights, and she was a child psychologist and he was a horticulturist and an ex-engineer for like ExxonMobil. And they came as volunteers with another couple who were in the pharmaceutical business, and she was a school teacher. And these people were the most loving human beings I had ever met in my life. They would sing these Christian songs, and then they would bring a breath of like outside life, philosophy, music, poetry to each Wednesday night. And then when somebody was getting ready to leave, they would allow that person to create a night, of sharing a book or
It was their night.
it was their night. So 3 times a week, I had Christian prayer group, Buddhist study, and Jewish Kabbalah. And all of a sudden, within a very short time, this spiritual study, which is all that was available to me, had me realize in this sea of suffering strangers, some of whom were really kind, but others who were going through horrors. And I want to share one of those in a minute, that happened early on that really shifted the trajectory of my time there forever. That had to do with something that happened to a mother. But I realized that there was nowhere to look outside of me. We all looked the same. We all wore green khaki uniforms, no makeup, au natural. Everybody was who they were, stripped down to their blood and bones. The routine was the same.
All right, so let me interject here. One of my questions, I heard you speaking and you said that in prison, you got to take a good hard look at yourself and maybe for the first time understand who you were and who you weren't. And it sounds to me that you were set on a path of discovery here. So first of all, who weren't you? What did you come to realize who you weren't, that maybe you thought you were in a past life?
I wasn't someone who had the ability to fix anyone else other than myself.
And is that how you saw yourself?
That I could
As
fix
someone who could fix others?
people, places, definitely. It was the way that I grew up, learning that if I could fix this situation in my family of origin, then I would be safe and I would be loved. And unconsciously, I repeated that pattern in marriage, in business partnership, with friends, and it was unconscious. It was not. Now, there's a good side to it because it made me very resilient and resourceful. And it made me learn about a lot of things I may have never known about. But it also made me arrogant and irreverent and unconscious about the fact that it's not for me to do that. It's for me to bring my curiosity to somebody and listen to people, but not to be fixing things to feel like I'm having things the way I wish them to be rather than accepting the way they are.
Is it possible that this belief that you could fix was something you were holding on to with your ego, and that was sort of a role you had?
It was
But because you also said you discovered who you really were. So who really did you discover you were?
I discovered that I was a woman who had very low self-worth, had never developed like really that I myself was a beautiful person, just even with out being able to fix and help and do for others, that I was okay just the way I was, and that there was a creative side of me that I had banished. I mean, I was voted most artistic person in my high school and hadn't picked up a paintbrush since. I got into this thing that I needed to make money in order to, be successful. Like, I started looking at what was really important to me, and money was not it. And the truth is, it never had been. I had all the trappings, but what was important to me was deep, authentic connection, deep, real, loving, genuine interaction. And I had had a lot of that, but I also had a lot of transactional relationships that, quite frankly, never felt good. It was like I I looked like one way, but I was a fraud inside, because I was afraid to admit what my real voice, my real beliefs, my real thoughts, because maybe I wouldn't be loved and I wouldn't be accepted and I wouldn't be safe. And I came to see, among women of every age, race, socioeconomic background, religion, that were different than me, that we all suffered from this common denominator. It didn't matter who we were. We all suffered from that inability to authentically think that we mattered, that our voice mattered, even if we even knew what it was. Okay.
Irrespective of your ability to fix for somebody else.
Or to be accepted or belong. I mean, I was an anomaly growing up. I was beautiful and I was very smart. And so either I had to be with the smart girls or the cool girls.
Well, your ego wasn't suffering them, that's for sure.
Well, but I didn't belong anywhere. So I thought of myself as poisoned, freckle-faced Ivy, and yet, so my persona on the outside was really,
A lie.
It was a lie. It was a lie.
Right. So you went through this period of self-awareness, and partially through your focus on a wide range of spiritual pursuits that you were sort of by default, discovered there. You also were, before we went on the air, you were talking about the disappointment you felt in yourself by what you put your family through, right? So that had to be a painful thing to be going through, right? I mean, there was a lot of emotions. What was that all about? What were you going through?
Well, first of all, when a woman goes to prison, her family goes with her. And from the moment that those FBI agents showed up at gunpoint, and my kids woke up and their eyeballs were like slinkies, like popping out of their brains, and they had to make that role reversal to start to find an attorney. I mean, I didn't have a criminal attorney. I tax attorneys for work. I had real estate attorneys. Who knew of a criminal attorney? Like, in that moment, my kids had to become grown-ups.
How old were they at the time?
They were 19, 23, 33, and so 19 and 23 were my natural born kids, and my stepkids that also lived with me they're each 10 years older than the other kids. So
Yeah.
they were not living at home, but still at the beginnings of their young lives, neither married yet, struggling in their careers or building their careers. And Kelly was just finishing college, and Brandon was just starting grad school. So they were not babies, but they were homeless and on their own, and having to work, there was no more money to pay for school. They were working their way through school, getting student loans. It was a life of privilege that went to a very working class struggle, life that was still
Overnight.
in 15 minutes. So I had a lot of shame and a lot of guilt. And in all honesty, ladies and gentlemen, there are moments I still do. There are moments when, if it's not a good month, I don't have a lot of extra money, and, I want to take the kids out for dinner and, forget that it's COVID, or even make a big holiday dinner, and it's going to be a $500 event with all of us now, with everybody and their significant others. And I still have that moment where I like worry, it's like not enough. And that was the feeling I had as they were voggling out there. And, we'd have our 15-minute phone calls that we figured out a rhythm. But then I realized that I was a matriarch without a dining room table. I was a mom without a home, and here they were coming to visit me, and I'd watch them walk up the hill, like not knowing how mom was going to be. And then I said, I got to lead by example. I got to show them that I'm discovering, and that I'm more than my mistake, and that I've got to listen to them and be really curious and see what they're going through. And I got to hold this together, even from in here. And so we all agreed that being that I had no email, and these 15-minute calls are truncated, you're only allowed 300 minutes a month. So that's 10 minutes a day. And every 5 minutes you hear this recording. This is a call from a federal prison. And then, you have 5 minutes left. And when you have 4 kids, it's a lot of juggling to do, to speak to everybody. So I decided that the only way to really go at this was the handwritten life. Like, I committed my time, every second that I had free, to writing to them, and then getting into this rhythm where I was sharing, I was asking, I was drawing, I was, we were having all kinds of interactions. And then there'd be that like 4, 5, 6 day period in between, waiting for the response, thinking about it, writing another one of them, then receiving it. Sometimes it was painful, then sitting with it, responding. And that is how I held my family together, because what I witnessed, I was so more fortunate than most. And this is the thing I want to share with you that I mentioned earlier. One day I came home from work, and I used to love to walk the track before mail time. I lived for mail time, because you could see that was my way of being uber connected, not only to the kids, but to friends and others. And so mail time was right before count. It was like 3:30. So you got back from work, 2:45, 3 o'clock, you ran down, got your yayas out on the track. And I was coming up from the track, and I heard a blood curdling, like an animal scream. And I went running into the building. Remember, it's only one long hallway. And there were a bunch of women gathered around a woman who was screaming in a way like an animal who was shot would be screaming. I don't even know how to describe it. And everybody's murmuring and whispering. And it turned out that her son had been killed in a drug shootout in Colombia, South America. And this woman lived next door to me. By now I had moved out of the bus stop and I lived in this subterranean windowless part of the camp where you lived in cubes like many of you may have in what used to be your offices. You know, there's no privacy, but there are like 3 walls and you have one bunk bed. It's 7 by 9 and 2 steel lockers that fit all of your belongings. And it's underground. So it's musty and dusty and not light filled and dark and cold. And, you know, that's good in the summer, but in the winter, it's freaking freezing. And that's where I lived. And she lived next door to me. And so I like rummaged through the crowd and I see that it's her and she's screaming and she sees me and she like puts her arms out, like, come to me, and tells me, my baby, my son. And I don't think I will ever forget that sound or that scene of that mother who was coldly told that she could not attend the funeral of her son. She was given one call by the chaplain to her sister who was in Puerto Rico and given some details and never given counseling, mental health, anything, was not able to not, I think she was given 2 days leave from her job. She worked in the construction shed. So, you know, I kept saying to our boss, like, Neely's not ready. She can't come back. And he's going, work will be good for her, Woolf-Turk. Come on, get her in the truck. You got to get her going. So like, she was just like another tragic, you know, woman who the attitude among the administration was, it's what you get when you're in a drug gang. And when, you know, this is a mother, this is was her only son. Like, you know, I could tell you story after story after story, you know, baby daddies that had new girlfriends and the kids were being left, and, you know, kids who were whisked at arrest into foster care, and mothers standing on the phone, weeping, begging the foster care agency, please, I'm trying to get out. Please don't, you know, let my mother have temporary custody, you know, husbands who would serve them with divorce papers. I mean, horrors every day. And, you know, all women who are helpless to do anything about it, you know, just sometimes to be able to buy a stamp or get a legal letter out or even have an attorney who will represent you. There were plenty of jailhouse attorneys, women who were lawyers and senators and trying to help other women. But it's, you know, it's hard to communicate when you only have 10 minutes a day and when your email's being read and you're afraid that you're going to get in trouble if you say the wrong thing. And how bad if you get sick? Like, there's no medical care. The people who were the medical care, she was a veterinarian who barely spoke English, spoke fluent Spanish, also from like Venezuela. She was a veterinarian. And this is the PA that they hired to take care of us. And all she used to say, no matter what you had, was lose some weight and take 2 Tylenol, buy it on the commissary. You know, like, meanwhile, I had a bunkie who kept saying she had chest pain. And yes, she was overweight. And one night she woke me up and said, I can't breathe. This woman had a heart attack in my arms. She had a heart attack. She didn't die, but then they transferred her. They didn't want to deal with her medical bill, so they transferred her down to the medical facility at Carswell, and she died there. I mean, it's like a warehouse for cattle. You are nothing more than your number. And
You know, Ivy, there's a bunch of people here who are listening to you who also have done time, and some of the people here have done 25, 30 years, and they come here so that they can listen to your testimony and share theirs and be around people who can relate to this inconceivable pain and share these experiences that no person should have to go through. So on behalf of everybody who's sitting here, our heart goes out to you for what you went through, and these poor women, there's nothing that can be said. But you have taken those experiences and you're doing something about it, and you're taking what you've learned and you're helping people, right? Tell us about what you're doing now.
So one day, and I won't belabor how this happened, but one day my ankle broke. And as I just mentioned, there was very limited medical care. So I was thrown off my construction job and given some other residents boot and told to go hang out in my cube. Well, that to me felt like a fate worse than death, because, getting out every day in the fresh air, driving my truck, like that was my life. Sitting at my desk, doing payroll, writing my letters to my kids. All of a sudden, I'm in a 7x9 cube with a steel locker by myself all day with a leg that I may never walk on again because they won't get it x-rayed and they won't give me a cast. And so then I heard the voice you never want to hear, because when you hear it, it usually means that somebody has died. And that's the voice of the CO on duty on the loudspeaker saying 60216 Woolf-Turk to the CO's office. I crawled. I mean, is one of my kids dead? Is my mother dead? Like, oh my God, I crawled. Everybody was at work. There was nobody around, to the CO's office, and he hands me a bag of books. And he goes, Woolf-Turk, we just had an early release. She was the English GED teacher. Welcome to your new job. I said, what? I've never taught English. He goes, you'll figure it out. Here are the books. You'll be in your cube for a while. 2 weeks, you get your classroom. And like, that's really how he spoke. He happened to be a really nice guy in his own way, but he was like a mobster. He used to follow Whitey Bulger. He was from that area of New England, and he would tell me stories about Whitey Bulger. Like, I didn't even know who Whitey Bulger was. He was this like big mafia guy in Rhode Island, whatever, who died not too long ago. But he was a good guy. You'll be fine. You're sitting in your cube anyway. Anyway, that was the beginning of really, I would say, what will be now the rest of my life. I was given a classroom, and I realized I had 62 students, all women of every age and race and demographic you could throw at me. And they all shared this common denominator, this feeling of lack of self-worth, of shame, that they had never been able. This one got pregnant at 13. This one's father was a drunk and threw her out, and she had to go to work and take care of her mother and her sister. Like, there were all these stories, and they were all the same. Didn't matter if it was the baby daddy who beat her, or the husband who threw her out, or the father who was like, they were all the same. And I realized this common denominator, and I went to the head of education, and this was the life changer. She was an amazing woman. And she said, you want to bring journaling into this to really teach them how to write and, gap that bridge from their unconscious to their conscious? Go for it. You want to teach meditation? You want to bring music? I got a boombox. Tell me what you want. I'll program it in, like, write a curriculum. And she let me run with it, and all the things that I was doing and studying and using. And I was so fortunate because my kids kept sending me books, and then I said, well, what about yoga? Like, there's a mind, body, spirit connection here. I'd like to teach yoga before we get into vocabulary and all the stuff they can't stand. She got it passed through the administration. I said, and wait a minute, like through the journaling, these women are taking responsibility. Why don't we like go out into the community and talk about the choices that we made to at-risk youth and like head them off at the pass? So she brought it to the camp administrator. The next thing I knew, we were 16 of us were going out, all different shapes, sizes, colors, races. We were going out to the local high schools and we were speaking to the kids, mind you, in trucks with bars on the windows, in uniform, okay, but none of us cared. It was like a chance to really stand in and take responsibility and notice our growth and give it to these kids, and many of whom were young girls. We went to halfway houses and group homes, and we traveled out a lot, and it was awesome. And then the day came when I said, these 62 women are graduating with their GED. They deserve a celebration. Has there ever been like any acknowledgement like of this? And this woman in education literally created, I don't know how she did it. She created a real graduation with visitors that were able to come on a day that was not visiting day, and a whole pomp and circumstance. She got somebody from Yale Law School to come and like do the commencement speech. It was unbelievable. And that day, as if some miracle happened, it was mail call, and I got a letter from my judge. Now, you never want to get a letter from your judge. It can't be good news. When I saw Judge Naomi Buchwald, I was like, fuck, what's this? And it said, "Dear Miss Woolf-Turk, it has come to my attention through a civil suit that I must recommend that you be released early. I can't commute your sentence because the loss has already happened, but I understand through the forensic accounting that your culpability is not what we thought it was." I sunk to my knees. Like I could, again, it was like menthol was in my blood. Like I just started shrieking and screaming, and I went and found my bunkie. And then, you don't just get to like knock on your counselor's door. You got to write a whole cop out and ask for an appointment. And it took like a week and a half for her to want to see me. She already knew. She had the copy of it, but like they weren't letting me out so fast. They'd already been paid for me. Like they weren't just like making arrangements to get me into halfway house. They weren't going to like do the paperwork so fast. Then they told me I was going to Brooklyn, and I'm writing my kids, this is July, and I'm going, guys, I'm coming home. I need a place to live. And meanwhile, I didn't get out until November 20th. And I was sent to a halfway house in the Bronx. And
That's where I was.
really?
Yep, the same one.
You were on Creston Avenue?
Yep. The Mr. Softy truck came around.
Okay, well,
That was the worst place ever.
it was, I can only say, and this will lead me to your question of what I'm doing now.
Yeah.
That first day, I wished I was back in Danbury. I had spent
Everybody said this. Everyone felt that way.
I had spent 46 and a half months in Danbury, and every woman that walked through those doors, shoe, no shoe, dreamed of the day that she would be released. And now I was wishing I could go back, if you could possibly understand that.
Yep.
And so my kids met me, I was so much luckier than most. I had kids, they picked me up on that cold day. I walked through the electric gate, and there we were in a huddle, and they surprised me, and the doggie was in the car, and the girls that had become my like blood friends, who, by the way, will be my friends till the day I die. Those relationships with the women I met, none of them look like me. None of them come from where I come from. We're all different, everything. And we love each other like we're family. And they were cheering, Loki, who was my dog, Loki, because they would see pictures of him that my children would send me. And like, I'm coming out, not, like, it was an amazing thing. And then I get to this halfway house, and my son, who had flown home from Germany, said, Mom, here's $100 to buy shampoo and a brush. And we didn't have any of those toiletry. We didn't have time. We borrowed clothes from some of your friends. You're a little chunkier now, so we don't know if they're going to fit you, but we did the best we could. We got you some boots. And they said that if we give you some money, there's a Burlington coat factory and you can go buy something down the road. And I said, all right, guys, don't worry. I'll be fine. Trust me, I am very resourceful. I'm going to figure it out. That first day, they give you 3 hours to go. And I heard there was a beauty supply store on like half a block away, and then a Burlington coat factory a few like blocks away. And the next thing I know, I'm on the ground, and I've got this pain in my shoulder and I can't get up. And I realized that the purse that they gave me with the $100 in it and my ID was gone. I'd been mugged. And there I was laying on Fordham Road. And all I could think of was, they're going to send me back because I have no health insurance. I thought my shoulder like broke off my body. I didn't understand it was dislocated in that moment because it was hanging off my body. And I have no cell phone. They won't allow me a cell phone. And then I'm laying there, and all I could think is, this is karma. You spent a career marginalizing families, women, children, buying up their buildings, not giving them rent concessions. And now you're one of them. Now you're one of them. And with that, a man came and said, ma'am, can I help you? And he started to lift me up, and it popped my shoulder back into place. I realized my purse was gone, and I had no choice but to go back to the halfway house and, of course, report what had happened and then get yelled at. And it was in that moment that I knew, if a woman like me, with all my resources, all my privilege, all my intellect, and all my experience, couldn't make it out here, what were the sisters I left behind going to do that had so much less than me?
And what are you doing to help them now? We have 1 minute. I'm sorry.
Okay. So what I'm doing now is, I went back to school. I became a certified professional coach. I'm practicing privately for people who feel imprisoned, or as I like to say, stuck. I founded Project Liberation. We have served over 400 women. It is a 18-week curriculum of personal development, all kinds of ancient and modern trauma-informed modalities, mushed together, fused together. And these women have climbed out of halfway houses, shelters, have found jobs and permanent housing, and have reunited with children, but mostly they have found themselves and learned to say no and learned to make decisions and listen to their voices. I've become a staunch advocate. I have traveled the world. I've studied best practice. I've spoken in prisons in India and Italy and Germany. I've been in the White House. I've been in every law school in this country. I've traveled around advocating for the rights and dignity of incarcerated folks, mostly women, because they are still, unfortunately, the most underserved. And I can only say, I may not have a lot of money, but I am the richest lady you've ever met, because I get to be who I am, do what I love, and have what I need, including my 4 remarkable children and my 2-year-old granddaughter.
Well, amen to all of that, and what it took to get you to this place. is an amazing story, but your perseverance and your heart and your soul is really the true hero here. And we all are very, very appreciative for your honesty and for your opening up your heart and sharing this. I think it's an inspiration for everybody, as I knew it would be. That is it for this week's installment of The Yard. If you're leaving the yard, then you're one of the lucky ones, because there's a lot of people that Ivy left on the yard who are still there going through it. In a couple of weeks, we have an amazing guest. His name is Freddie Gibbs. And if you know anything about hip hop, you know he's a big deal in that world. So he'll be joining us and telling us about his very, very interesting life. Next week, we have a surprise that I don't want to share with you right now, but you'll dig that too. As always, if you think that you would make a great guest on The Yard, and or you know someone who you think might as well, please get in touch with Adrian. Adrian's email is Adrienne, ADRIENNE @commissary.club. And again, the only qualification we ask is, well, there's two things. Number one, you've done time on The Yard. And number two, you're prepared to open up your heart, just as Ivy has done with us tonight. We just launched, and it's available at the App Store, our new mobile app called Commissary Club. Please check it out. Please download it. Please give it 5 stars because you think it's great. I think it's great. And our goal is to bring together people like ourselves to everybody else so we can share stories like this and serve as role models and give advice and inspire one another, because if we don't do it for each other, nobody's going to. We launched a crowdfunding campaign on Republic, and we would love your support. If you like what we're doing, go to republic.co/commissary.club. And you'll learn more about us. We are a for-profit business, and I believe that we will make you a lot of money if you invest in us. Follow us, follow me, Adrian, Seth, and Divine, and follow Ivy. Ivy, I don't know if Adrian's already done it, but please make sure you leave an email or some way that people can get in touch with you. I'm sure some people would like to. Tell your friends about The Yard. We're humbled to have a chance to serve the population we do. We believe that they are nothing short of heroes. We've all made mistakes. Who among us haven't? You know, let's celebrate our humanity together like people do every day out on The Yard. So thank you all, folks, so much for joining us. Ivy, you are an amazing woman. And thank you for joining us tonight. We'll see you next week on The Yard, everybody. Have a good night.
Thanks for having me.